Hey, Hickok 45. Today, I'm glad you're with me because we're going to look at the lever gun, the first successful lever gun, really, that started it all. The Henry, the 1860 Henry. Is that a thing of beauty or is it not? It's empty, as you might be able to tell. I loaded it on Sunday, and it's kind of late in the week, so it's run out. But we're going to reload it here in a second and see how it does. This is the first successful lever gun, I guess you could say. Not the very first attempt at it, but the first one that was produced, sold, shot, and used even in the Civil War. And you recognize it, most of you probably. What a beauty. This is a Uberti reproduction, very accurate, reproduction of that thing. An original fire is a Rimfire 44, and they sell for around 50,000. So I doubt that you're going to see too many of those in YouTube videos, people shooting them. We are going to actually fire this one. So to load it is very unusual. For a big old lever gun, you pull up this little tab, put that over, that opens up the tube. Now, that looks pretty cool, but it does have some disadvantages. As we slide some cartridges in here, I'll talk about a little bit of that. You want to be careful not to have too much of an angle and have your rounds slamming against each other. That's not good. Even though these are flat nosed, that's not good, because they're heavy, and you could have a mishap if you're slamming those rounds into each other. And also, when you release the tab, which I'll do in a second, you want to be careful about that and not let it slam into the rounds either. Okay, you pull that back over. Of course, it's not going to happen when it's full, but that's how you load it. And of course, you can see the rounds. Pretty cool. However, there's some disadvantages to that, right? Because you could get dirt in there, dust and fouling and everything, and you could mess up the works pretty easily. But this was the first real attempt at it. Let's take a couple of shots with it. All right. This is 45 Long Colt, okay? We couldn't find any 44 Henry rimfire, or we would have bought some, maybe some bulk packs of it. If you tell anybody I missed that 2-liter there, I will never forgive you. But that's what I just did. I don't know how that happened. Oh, stranger things have happened. Right? Pretty cool. Yeah. Oh man. Notice the tab is coming down as the rounds are being expended right into my hand. So I'm going to move my hand in front of it and take a couple more shots. Oh, there's a flower pot. There was a flower pot. Oh, there's a can. Woo! I'm not sure what that was. Whatever it was, it's not any longer. Oh, there's another pot. There's a cowboy. That's appropriate, isn't it? So you see that tab comes all the way down now. And like I was saying, you wouldn't want to reload it. Say you're just going to load 4 or 5 rounds or something. Let that thing fly, because look at that. That might not be good if you slam that into those rounds. Okay, so that's just something to be aware of in terms of safety with these firearms. As I was saying, you wouldn't want to. Okay, it's time to load it. You wouldn't want to do this. Put it on your. People have done it, I'm sure. Put it down on your foot, and drop rounds in. That would be the natural inclination. But not the best practice at all. Okay, it's just not what you would do. It's a lever gun, obviously, and it's pretty much traditional, isn't it? It looks like most of the lever guns that you've seen in terms of how the lever works. Cocks the firearm, you pull the trigger. When you lever it, brings another round up, puts it in the chamber and everything. Except the one big difference is this was one of the very first ones. I've shared some of that with you, but the Volcanic Arms Company, which was in existence back in the 50s, mid-50s, was making well, actually, I think, got my little cheat sheet. The little pistol I've shown before called the Volcanic pistol, and you notice it looks similar to this in the action, because it's kind of the great grandfather, you could say, of the Henry, and that's a product of the Volcanic Arms Company. In fact, Smith & Wesson, Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson worked on that. They borrowed and bought some patents that dated back to 5, 6, 7 years earlier to Hunt and Jennings. So it's, there's a lot there, a lot of history if you ever want to read about it. So there were some early attempts at a lever gun by Hunt and Jennings, and then when it got to the Volcanic Arms Company in the mid 1850s, you had Smith & Wesson working on it. They improved it, and they needed investors in the mid 1850s, and guess who became their chief investor, top stockholder? A guy by the name of Oliver Winchester. You guessed it. And so he was a very key player there, and they were using a round in that gun that was like this. It was smaller caliber, but it was a hollowed out piece of lead with powder in it, and then I think they worked out a priming system for it too, but it just wasn't very powerful. It was a small caliber, 32, 25, something like that, and it just wasn't as reliable or effective, and so the company fell on bad times, really. And so Oliver Winchester more or less took it over. Smith & Wesson left to make revolvers and focus on that, I think, and Oliver Winchester became the president and basically the owner of that company, okay, Volcanic Arms. And then he changed the name in 1857 to New Haven Arms Company. That's when he hired a fellow by the name of Benjamin Tyler Henry as plant superintendent and put him to work on fixing this thing. And they're working on new cartridges and everything, improving the action of the Volcanic, and he came up with this. Okay, that's kind of the nutshell story there, but this is what he came up with by 1860. That's why this is called the 1860 Henry, and it fired this 44 rimfire cartridge. This is actually an original in a copper case. This is the real deal right here, and that's what it fired, the 44 Henry rimfire. We don't have any of those, like I said, so let's load it up. And it was patented in 1860, as I said, but it really wasn't out there until really, I think, 1862. And they didn't, get them produced, the machinery together, and to make them enough to get them on the market until 1862. And the military, the North, bought around 2,000 of them almost, I think. But from my reading, only about 1,000 of those actually got into service, and most of the ones used during the Civil War were purchased with private funds by the soldiers, and there were around 10,000 of them out there, and used, especially on the northern side by the Federals. But it was a very desirable firearm to have, as you can imagine, because again, as I have pointed out before, 1860, 62. If you had a handgun in the Civil War, you were carrying probably a cap and ball pistol, just like this 1860. This is an 1860 model Army, very, very popular. You loaded it as percussion. You had all this business to go through to load it from the front and everything. It didn't use cartridges. There were later some conversions even to this cartridge, but that was later in the 1860s, later 60s. So they were packing these. They were packing muzzle loaders. Most soldiers had a muzzle loader. So can you imagine how cool it would be to have this? As Colonel Mosby said, it's that damn Yankee rifle that you load on Sunday and fire all week. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, because this was new. This was a new thing, to have something that you could actually rapid fire. We take it for granted. In fact, some of you might look back on it and think, wow, an antique, an old lever gun, who wants that? Well, in the early 1860s, this was like having a minigun. It was something that would hold that many rounds, enclosed cartridges that were pretty much protected from the rain, because you know what they were doing before then, they were loading from the muzzle, and with powder and ball and everything. So this was high tech, really high tech. So let's bring one up. In these old toggle link systems like this one in the 1866 and the 73 and the 76, you had a toggle link system. The elevator would bring the round up and go straight in, a torpedo right into the chamber, and then you bring it up and fire it. And I think the sights are pretty close on. I've not had this long, but Let's try that red plate, just for kicks. Yeah. There we go. Little piggy. Try a turkey. Now the tab is right there in my hand. You can kind of grab it like that so that maybe it goes through your hand. When I get really ambitious and try that chicken. Not sure where I hit. Oh well, I'm not going to waste a lot of lead on him. Let's try a turkey here. Another one. Boom. Let's try a cinder block right here close. Let's try a cinder block far away over there. Boom, went over. Actually, the sight feels pretty good. I think with just a little bit of shooting, I could pick off chickens without too much trouble. I don't see it really clearly. I should probably shoot with my other eye. But hopefully you can kind of appreciate, take yourself back into history and imagine what that was like to have a lever gun that would hold that many rounds, 14, 15 rounds of 44 in a cartridge. You didn't have to worry about it raining on it, and it would still work. They were black powder, of course. That's all there was in the 1860s. But and of course, on top of everything else, is that not a gorgeous firearm? I have always admired them. They're just beautiful. They really are. Now, they have some disadvantages, but I mean, there is not a firearm that I'm aware of that really is better looking than that, if you want to just talk about the looks of it, of course. And of course, it's very functional. Just a gorgeous firearm. It's sweet. Every time I have seen one in a movie, what are some movies you'll see these in? Silverado, if you're familiar with that, or Lonesome Dove. You'll see Henry action, because it just was very, very, very popular. Now, negatives. Well, that opening, like I talked about, you'd get dirt into it, of course, and hang up your feeding, your tube, and everything, and then have to try to get it clean. The actual loading system, because you have this tab, coming up through there into your hand and everything, and I understand that these would get rusty sometimes. You didn't keep them lubed and really clean and oiled. This shroud that covers the barrel there and spins. And of course, the safety issues with loading it, dropping rounds down on top of each other, big rounds, fairly powerful, with the spring slapping against it. You have that you could consider a disadvantage. Now, some of that they weren't aware of, because this was the first, right? We can talk about all that being really negatives and, wow, how crazy. Why would you invent it like that? Well, that's because we've been seeing tubular magazines all of our lives, and so this was one of the first, so they just had to figure out how to do it better. Well, all they knew was to load it from the end. Well, you know what happened? There was a patent, it was King's patent, a loading gate that came along a little bit later, and this one doesn't have it, of course, because it's a Henry. These were just made basically from like around 1861 to 66 when the improved Henry came out. And just briefly, this is basically what they did to improve it. You got your loading gate, so you could top off the magazine anytime you want, just like all lever guns since then, right? You have your enclosed tube, so you don't have that issue of getting dirt into the magazine. And you do away with all this business at the end of the barrel and that having to swivel around, and all that is eliminated because you just put one round in at a time, and you got pressure from the spring. And you got your forearm here. You got a forend that enables you to hold by that, and you don't have that tab coming down into your hand. And also, these barrels, especially with black powder, get very hot, with rapid firing them very much. So with the forend, as we're accustomed to seeing on all lever guns, you got protection there. Okay, So those were some big innovations. Plus, if you notice, the tube is part of the barrel. That's all one piece. That's pretty expensive to manufacture. Well, I wouldn't want to try. Look at it, with an octagonal barrel to boot. So when you can manufacture those separately, it gives you more options on the barrel and everything else. So still had the brass frame on the 66. This was basically an improved Henry. Okay, so let's load him up again. Because this is about this wonderful Henry, this wonderful piece of history. So anyway, the Benjamin Tyler Henry, basically came up with this. He worked night and day in 58, 59, 60, getting this thing where he wanted it. And he was working for Winchester, basically, right? Winchester was in charge of this company, the New Haven Arms Company. That's why this really is a Winchester. It just didn't have the Winchester name on it. So it was Winchester's company, essentially, the New Haven Arms Company. And then when in '66, they improved it further and came out with that one over there I was just showing you. He changed the name of the company to Winchester, okay? So this really is a Winchester, essentially. Okay, first incarnation, got the same toggle link system, and not a really strong action. Most of these, or all of these, basically are a pistol cartridge revolver, or not revolver, but lever gun. They fire like, that's definitely a pistol cartridge, right? And so is a 45 Colt. And the 66 fired the same cartridge, the 44 rimfire Henry. So you really didn't have a center fire cartridge until you got to 73, with the 4440 and the 73 model, which was an iron frame, which is another story. But today we're looking at this baby, and again, for whatever negatives it had, for the times, it was an extreme innovation. It's like going back and like my Macintosh computer I bought in '84. It was pretty innovative. But now if you compare it with computers today, it's a joke, right? An absolute joke. So pretty cool. Again, this is one beautiful rifle. It's really not all that loud with these 45 Colts and this long barrel. We'll still use ear protection. We have a couple of cinder blocks over there that need some attention, I think. Or pieces of one. There we go. This one right here needs another hit. For sure. Oh, nice. Oh, we haven't shot the gong. All right. Bring a little history to the gong. Yeah. And up close here. Oh. Yeah. Let's try a plate here, see where it hits. See, to be able to do that, to be able to lever and shoot rapidly in 1862, well, I mean, that was pretty amazing. It was really the first firearm that allowed rapid fire. It was a little bit difficult to rapid fire a muzzle loader. I've tried it and I fail every time. With this though, you can actually fire rapidly and with a pretty gun. Let's put just a couple more in it. We won't keep you too late, but I wanted to just shoot a couple more times. It's a beautiful piece of hardware. So we pull this up again. We try to let gravity be our friend, but we don't want too much gravity, right? Not too much. Now, again, this was, guys in the Civil War, of course, love to have this. They get their hands on it with ample ammunition. And then, of course, the question always comes up is why didn't the military just really go to this kind of firearm? And again, the lever was one of the reasons. The military brass felt like it was too fragile. They say that about a lot of lever guns. And then difficult to shoot from a prone position with, the lever and any other reason they could think of. It was used though. I mean, these lever guns were used in militaries around the world, Turkey, different places, especially before there were other better options, But Think about it. If you were in the Wild West, because 1860s, you still have some Wild West for sure, don't you? Wild areas, maybe in lots of areas, but wild country in lots of areas. And all you had before this was maybe a single shot shotgun or rifle, and you know what it took to reload it. Well, think about this. If you think of the confidence that you would have just having this on your horse or in your wagon, no matter where you were. Now it'd be tough maybe to bring down a Grizz with it, but maybe you could, just because the cartridge was underpowered. Still works pretty well. Having that kind of firepower in 1862, you're fighting in the Civil War, or I don't know, you're being attacked by anybody, any kind of bad guys that want to do harm to you. I would have loved to have this in the early 1860s, and then of course in '66, the model 1866. The brass frame, of course, is not a big negative, but a metal frame, iron frame, is a little bit stronger. So that's something too that can be considered a negative. I'll tell you though, that is such a good-looking gun. That's one of the attractions, to this firearm, is that beautiful brass frame. At least for us folks living in 2013, right? Just a beautiful, beautiful firearm. The Henry rifle, again, not to be confused with the modern company, the Henry. I think it's the Henry Repeating Rifle Company that makes really fine firearms. And they sell a lot of those today, and people are really happy with them. We've done a video with them. This is Benjamin Tyler Henry. Came up with this for the most part and perfected it in 1860. Was at least patented in 1860, and so this is the real Henry, and at least a reproduction of it. Remember, it fired 44 rimfire, not available today. So if you feel like you have to have one of these, don't go looking for an original if you want to fire it. Okay. Now, if you have a large bank account and you don't care about firing it, then you can find them. But this is a very interesting piece of history to me. It's one of my favorite firearms. It's one of the most gorgeous firearms out there, and I'm glad to have one at the compound and be able to bring it to you. The Henry rifle, 1860. Oh, what a gorgeous firearm. Life is good.